Many of you, most of you, I recognize. Some of you I don't. So I'll introduce myself as Gordon Greene, and I am here in southwestern Wisconsin at the Spring Green Dojo. And I don't know if all you know of us is online. It may not be kind of clear how we're structured as an organization, but we've got this umbrella called Chosei Zen. That's the name of our Zen. That's the name of our organization. And inside of that, we've got 3 training dojos. And right now we're participating in the virtual dojo, the online dojo, which has been built up over these past 2 years under Greene Roshi's leadership. There's also a physical dojo in Madison, Wisconsin, and it's called Daiko Zenji is the name of it. It's an old church that has been wonderfully renovated by Greene Roshi into a training facility that you all should at some point take advantage of. The third dojo we have is this one, Spring Green Dojo, which is an hour's drive west of Madison, out in the countryside. A lot of trees, a lot of open skies. And this is where my wife Patricia and I have basically built up a training center for people to come. So this is a place where people come for a 3 or 4 day session. They come for a 6-day session. They come for a 3-week training period. And many times it's people traveling from a distance. So just to keep you oriented, we've got the virtual dojo, we've got the Daiko Zenji sort of urban dojo, and we've got Spring Green Dojo, which is the facility out in the countryside. So that's who I am, that's where I am. Our subject, the title I'd given this in the midst of your 90-day challenge, was Unbuilding the Habit of Identity. And I'm really glad I had a chance to look at Greene Roshi's talk. I don't know if it was a month ago. I missed the live presentation, but I then saw the recording. It cracked me up. It was terrific. And what was terrific about it was that it reinforced where our training takes us. You know, that we as you get into your body, as you get into your breath, you know, there's things you find out that are not so different from anybody else who trains with us. And so if I hadn't seen her talk, I'm guessing my talk would have been just about the same. I would have just landed on the same points that she did. I would have told a few stories about myself as she did, just to sort of show this is where training takes you. And the wonderful thing about the topic that Whitelaw Roshi chose for this 90-day challenge, this idea of habit, is it really is a powerful unifying theme for our training methods. You can sort of pick up almost anything that we do and link it to habit. So you can see Greene Roshi's talk. I know it's been recorded, and I very much urge you to do that. And I know that Whitelaw Roshi's done a talk, and Krishna Roshi, I think, is going to do a talk. And if you're participating in all of them, it's sort of like these guys reading from the same script. But here's what I'm going to do today, you know, that when you're willing to spend time with me, I too am going to tell some stories and then tell you what those stories do for me. And I'll start with my daughter, Laura. She's about, I can't remember exactly, 2 or 3 years old. We're living in our house while I'm doing grad school. It's my turn to feed her dinner. And I can picture this room she's in. There's just a little tiny dining room, and she's got one of these high chair kind of things sort of set in the corner, and she's on top of a sheet of linoleum because of the way food somehow mysteriously spills away from kids when they're eating or when you're feeding them. And it had to have been mushed peas. I'm thinking, part of a diet was orange, which would have been like squash or something. And often there was a lot of green stuff, which had to be peas in addition to Cheerios. But anyway, there I am, and I'm sitting beside her, and I've got the spoonful of peas, and she's being herself. And this is really hard to describe, but it was as if in the midst of this mess of feeding and spoons here, and some bites were taken and some bites just sort of spilled out, she got her ego. It was the shell that descended over her persona. There was this kid that I knew sitting down to feed her dinner, and now here was in some ways a very different person. And it was just one of these flashes of insight, just bam, 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 bam. What struck me is that, wow, when you're 2 and 3 years old, the world's kind of a tough place. You got all this sensory input. You got all this stuff happening to you. You got very little control over any of it. People are doing stuff to you endlessly. They're not asking your opinion. And then suddenly, bam. Okay, here's how I'm going to deal with that as a 2-year-old. I'm gonna create an ego. That's my shell. That's how I'm gonna start to relate to the world, is that this is me. And if I don't like the peas, I have no problem spitting them out. And if I don't want to go to bed, I got no problems telling you that. And if I don't want this, if I don't want this, I don't want this. So something solidifies, something becomes strong. Any of you dealt with kids in their 2s and 3s? Yeah, they're a strong force. So that notion that she needed protection, she needed a shell, and she herself made it. I mean, it wasn't anything I was doing. That she herself created this shell. And it struck me that this is kind of like let's just call it the tragedy of human existence, is that we create our ego at a very young age, and we forget that we ourselves created it. And then we're stuck with it. If you didn't know that you created it, well, there you go. There you go. That's it. You're stuck with that till you're dead. So that's one story. Now let's go to somewhere, maybe, I don't know, 34, 35 years ago, when I was living in Vancouver in Canada. And I had finished my first 3 years of monastic training at Jozenji in Honolulu. And I was very inadequately struggling to start a dojo in Vancouver, failing miserably. I'd had a couple jobs to pay the rent. Those were frustrating. And in some form of madness, I decided I'm going to start a publishing company. And I did. And I had 2 books in print. And now I am in I had a SUV thing. And I needed to get this book into bookstores. I needed to get it known. And there were trade show things, and there was, you know, interviews on CBC, and there was good effort behind this publicity stuff. But I'd loaded up the truck, put all the boxes of books in the back, and started down the West Coast, thinking that I'd be just going bookstore to bookstore to bookstore to bookstore. And actually, 35 years ago, there really were bookstores. And I must have gotten somewhere just past, well, maybe it was around San Francisco. I was headed south. LA was my turnaround point. And I picked up a hitchhiker, a middle-aged guy who had been in Reno. And I forget if he was a hustler or if he was doing petty crime, or I forget what it was, but he had to get out of Reno, and he was headed down to LA because there was a friend who'd offered to put him up for a little bit. And so we drove down the coast, and he's telling me, kind of the story of his life. And I don't remember any of the details, but I remember dropping him off after dark, late at night, at this tiny little tract house in LA. And I was in despair. I'd hit many low points in my life before this, but this was kind of like the worst. And what was worst about it was that I could so easily identify with this guy who basically had failed at this and failed at that and failed at this and failed at that, and had nothing to show for it. And that's how I felt. I had, my first marriage ended. My first wife ended it. There were 2 young kids. Out of that pain, I went to do my formal monastic training at Chozenji, but I felt very much I was failing my kids. I had left behind a career as a research scientist working for the federal government. I thought I'd failed at that. I was not a good son to my parents. I could hardly get in touch with them because I felt so empty of anything. I felt like a lousy Zen student. I was not pulling together the dojo I had imagined in Vancouver. And it was just like one of those just very rapid reviews of your life where you're just saying, no, that's just, I'm lousy at that, I'm lousy at that, I'm lousy at that, I'm lousy at that. And it was like there was just nothing left. Here I am, I don't know what, 35, 37 years old, feeling like there was absolutely nothing. Everything that I had built up for my identity, father, son, Zen student, publisher, research scientist, every one of those felt like a failure. So there was just I described it just despair, but it's more like terror. that I had lost my identity. And I know you or someone close to you at some point, you've had a heartfelt conversation where you go, if I'm not a good father, then who am I? I know a man who was a physician who committed suicide. And he committed suicide because he felt, if I'm not a good doctor, then who am I? And he was so devastated by that loss of identity that he killed himself. So identity is powerful stuff. Losing identity is powerful stuff. So by what right, I don't know, that's not a good word, but how is it in Zen we talk about losing identity? I've got one more story, but let me preface that by saying that this sort of my working framework when I think about habit, when I think about identity, is that whatever I think I am, whatever the self is contained within my skin, it's no more than a collection of habits. It's just things built up over time. You know, when I was 2 years old, I wasn't a research scientist. At 2 years old, you know, I wasn't a book publisher. Just over time, we sort of add this and we add this and we add this and we add this, and we embodied this. We embody this. We assemble all this stuff, and we think that's who we are. This is my identity. I am this. Boom, 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 boom. I've already told you I'm the guy who runs Spring Greene Dojo. Okay, identity. But that's just a that's just a thought. That's just a construct. That's not a reality. So let me shift to the last story, and then we'll circle back around, because this last story is based on a real person, but this is somebody who, let me look at my notes here. 13th century Japan. 13th century Japan. And there was so factual detail, kind of sketchy, but there's still stories that persist. So her name, her given name was Chiyono. Chiyono. Find reference to Chiyono if you look for that name. She has a Buddhist name, but I didn't write that down. So let's keep her as Chiyono. She was a daughter of a samurai of that era. And just the sketchiest of details that she got married at a young age. She had a daughter not long afterwards. Quasi nobility, sort of in the Japanese hierarchy of, peasant to lord. But her husband died very abruptly when he was young. So not long after they were married and her daughter was born, her husband died. So now she's a widow. And we don't know how her interest we don't know her spiritual life. We don't know what she was going through as she lost her husband and began raising her daughter. What we do know is that when she felt that her daughter was grown and somehow, I don't know, in some fashion could take care of herself, Chiyono sought out Zen training. And it had just in a formal sense, Zen as we know it today had just pretty much showed up in Japan coming from China. And the first teacher, the Chinese man who brought it to Japan, is Japanese. He goes by several different Japanese names, but Bukko Kokushi is sort of the historical name by which he's most known. And he's considered sort of the first teacher of Zen in Japan. And lo and behold, his temple was very close to where Chiyono lived. And so she probably had an opportunity at some point to hear him talk. And something just, boom, locked in. This is how she was going to spend her life, was needing to master what he knew. And there had to be some defining quest. There had to be something that she was driven to figure out. But I can't find reference to what that is, but we just know that she was driven. There's various stories about how she first was training with a number of nuns, and who first just sort of treated her as sort of this middle-aged interloper, and didn't. She was sort of, I think she was assigned as a cook or somebody, housekeeper in the temple, but she persisted. She sought out by what, how do these people, what do you do when you do Zazen? How do you breathe? How do you do this stuff? And she persisted and she persisted and she persisted, and finally became a student of Bukko Kokushi. So there must have been like a nun's temple, sort of as part of it, in an area where there was also other training temples run by Bukko. And somehow, he maybe was like a visiting teacher who would come and do lectures, but also had Sanzen students. So she became a Sanzen student. And just to fast forward, we'll come back to her enlightenment in a minute, but to fast forward, she became his heir. She attained a profound series of enlightenments and is known as the first female Zen master. Apparently no such thing ever existed in China, although at least, the men are writing the history, so it's possible that there were women who got bumped to the side. But as far as Japan goes, they couldn't bump her to the side. She is credited as the first, and was the successor to the first Zen teacher in Japan. So this is an important figure. So back to her training days. She's getting older. If she had a grown daughter, she probably didn't start her training till, I'm guessing, I don't know, early 30s, probably at the earliest, late 30s. Rigorous training. Endlessly frustrating. No progress she felt with her go-on training, with her training with her teacher. And she's got nothing left. There's no other life to go back to. This is it. This is how she staked her life. And I can identify a little bit from that night in Los Angeles when I just sat crying in my truck over my degree of failure. One of her tasks, household or temple tasks, was to take care of the equipment. And I've seen water buckets in Japan, traditional style, sort of, wooden sides to them, and then bound together the compression is done by these bamboo straps, one at the bottom, one at the top, and it's fitted into a wooden base. And so basically it's a bucket that's held together by compression of these two bamboo bands. And you try to hang on to your tools as long as possible. So something breaks, you repair it. Something becomes old, you repair it. And so she had been repairing the buckets that they used to haul water from the well. And there's one night where she is bringing back water from the well in one of these buckets that she had taken care of. And I could pretty much picture this, but at a certain point, she's walking on a path and there's trees, and so she's not open to the sky, but then she comes into an opening just before she gets to the temple, and the sky there's no trees, the sky is clear, and here's a full moon, and she glances into her bucket, and there's the moon shining in her bucket. And she takes one more step. Bamboo breaks. Suddenly the water spills, buckets on the ground. And that was what it took for her to break through. This moon in the bucket in one moment, and then suddenly the bucket shatters, the water's gone, the image of the moon on the water is gone. And this is you'll see, if you look for this, you'll see a lot of artwork of this moment for Chiyono and her bucket. But here's what gets to me with this one. The moon's in the sky, right? Objectively. But here it is shining in the bucket. And so we think of the moon in the bucket. We think of our identity as in the bucket, right? It's held within something. But then there's a moment when it shatters. Now, where's the moon? Where's the identity? And I have this incredible luxury. I don't know what you'll see, but let me just turn this. Here's windows. For this particular place where Pat and I sit zazen, looking out over the prairie, hillside, trees, an area, oak savanna. And there have been several times this past year full moon, and I can't see the moon because it's up in the sky, and I'm inside. But the moon has spilled over the landscape. It's just poured out. And there was one night where I experienced that, and it flashed me back to maybe 4 other times in my life where I have been floating in a sea of moonlight. It was just a night so clear, so rich. And when that happens to you, you're not thinking about the moon. You're not thinking about a thing. You're not thinking about a source. You're just immersed. You're just immersed in the light. So for me now, that's even better than thinking of sort of the mechanics of a body sort of poorly welded together, habits poorly welded together into an identity. Once your identity just sort of breaks and spills out over the landscape, it's like, well, where are you? Who are you? Ah, ah, ah. You start to sing, you start to dance. So me at that in despair in Los Angeles, that could have been my Chiyono moment. But it wasn't. My training hadn't gone far enough. Instead, I just sort of clawed my way back, just kind of like, no, I refuse to be a failure. I refuse. I will make myself into something. Chiyono didn't do that. It was gone. She was gone. She was fine. She was gone. So I'm going to do a time check. How do we train? What is it about Zen that basically assaults your habits? Well, you know about Zazen. You've been doing a fair amount of that. And to the degree that your Zazen is physical, your breath and gravity, that can be a very deep way of experiencing what I'm describing. There's times where your body just disappears. But then that just feels like a momentary illusion. And you're suddenly sort of boom, you're sort of brought back together again. Now your body's back. Now your knee's hurting. Now you're hungry. Now you go take a piss. So this idea, this feeling of a bungee cord that, I don't know, people use bungee cords still. Is that a thing? Yeah, okay, I'm seeing thumbs up, bungee cords. To me, that's what this damn identity stuff is like. It's like you get out there, you start to break it apart, you start to dissolve some of the boundaries, you start to grasp a little bit of these stories we're telling, and then gunk, that bungee cord pulls you right back together again. So Zazen is one way to try and break the bungee cords. But we also have very, very, very clear forms of training beyond the Zazen. And to me, this is one of the great genius quality. I think every culture that's been around for any amount of time has got some genius qualities to it. And I think the genius quality to Japanese culture is this idea that very strict attention to form can be transformative. It can set you free. And things like a tea ceremony, and if you've ever been part of a tea ceremony, it looks incredibly artificial. It's like, what the hell is this? They're folding their napkin this way. And if you've ever been a tea student, you've been scolded endlessly because of the way you fold your little and the way you set down this implement. Really, really strict form, unforgiving form. You have at least heard, if not participated in, our form of sword training called Hojo is the historical name. It's a very old sword form. It's not a fighting combative form. It's a kata, two people, each with a heavy wooden sword, moving, breathing together. And again, it feels, for somebody not formally, who's not formally schooled in sword, you didn't grow up with it, you didn't, go to battle with your sword and survive because of you could actually wield that sword. Again, this form feels artificial. I mean, I put it here, now it comes down, now it goes right, now it goes left, now I go forward, now I walk back. What is that? And our way of doing calligraphy training, where we have, we have a calligraphy manual, and it's 3 characters vertical on a page, and then another 3 characters vertical on a page, and then another 3 characters vertical on a page, and you're asked to brush those characters. In all of these things, you're not invited to interpret them. You're not invited to express yourself with your brush. Kind of an American way of thinking. You're not invited to express yourself with tea. Here's guests coming. I love tea. I love to serve them tea, but I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to serve them tea my way. Or people who've trained a lot with a sword, they get to the Hojo training and they want to be expressive because it's based on, formally, it's based on the 4 seasons. And 4 seasons, the way sort of we, at least in North America, in the Northern Hemisphere, know 4 seasons, where there's just a very distinct feeling for winter, and there's a very distinct feeling for spring, and a very distinct feeling for summer. You don't have to really imagine it. It's just like you've lived it. So now here you have a 4-part form, kata, and you're going to get expressive. Well, this is how I experience winter. And now it's spring, and so it's spring-like, so I'm going to be spring-like, right? None of these forms are meant to be expressive. I know you heard it from Greene Roshi. I'm guessing you've heard it from every other speaker in this series on habit, that the goal of training in Hojo is to take away every habit since the day you were born. And there's no difference from saying that for Hojo than to say that for tea, to say that for brushwork, to say that for any other formal Japanese art form. Take away every habit since the day you were born. Oh man, talk about an alien concept when I first encountered that. Talk about an alien concept for many, many years as I encountered that. What in the world does that mean? So does that mean, I brush my teeth with my right hand and now I brush it with my left hand? Because this is a habit, but let me break that habit and do it this way. Or when I sit down to a table of food, depending on my first bite usually is, the potatoes. I don't know what it would be. But this sort of, once you start thinking about habit, you just see, that's all there is. That's the whole shebang. Everything you do, there's a default. It's a habit. So if I'm supposed to take away every habit since the day before I was born, does that mean I've got to every damn minute eat my food differently, brush my teeth differently, change my clothes differently, take a piss differently, say hello to a friend differently? I mean, there's no end to it. But at least within a form like Hojo or brush, the question for yourself is, why can't I do it the way it has just been demonstrated. So with a Hojo, it'd be by your Hojo teacher. They did it this way. What's the barrier to you matching that? What's the barrier to your calligraphy characters not looking like those in the manual, the master calligraphy? What's in the way of that? Oh, well, it's, I got this thing with my right shoulder. So when I have a brush in my right hand and I move it like this, somehow when I do that last bit of change with the brush, something changes in my shoulder, and I don't know what to do with that. So you start to get obsessive about just the detail. What's happening with my tongue and my lips when I do this character? And while I'm doing that character, does anything change here? Does that help me match the character? You're trying to become one with is the traditional phrase we use, that the barrier between you and Yamokoteshu disappears. The barrier between you and a master swordsman with Hojo disappears. The barrier between you and a master of tea disappears. Here's the good news. If you can crack just one habit acquired since the day you were born, the rest of them start to fall away. We actually where I live, I haven't seen it personally, but we live in a valley, Sneed Creek Valley, runs from the south to the north into the Wisconsin River. And early on, getting to know one of our neighbors, friendly guy, he knew we had a young son, Sam. He asked if we wanted to see the beaver dam before he blew it up. I don't know if he actually blew it up or he bulldozed it or something, but there was a beaver dam that was flooding acreage that he used for planting corn. So those beavers were in the way, but they were beavers. But from my time living in Canada, I've seen beavers, I've seen beaver dams, I've seen what they do. And there's this wonderful phenomena where if you start to pull apart a beaver dam, kind of find the right pieces to pluck out of it, now water starts to do the rest of the work. So you get a little bit of an opening in that beaver dam, and now the force of water starts to push the rest of it apart. And that's my experience with habit, that if you can finally crack one of them, you've let this force start to emerge, start to come through you. And for me, the habit was how I used my feet during the Hojo movement, how I carried my weight on my feet. There's a certain way how you're moving your feet, and there's certain ways that your weight shifts in your feet. And this became my obsession. And the defining motivation was this sense of, I don't know how to stand. This was sort of early in my Hojo training. It's like, I don't know how to stand up. Yes, I'm standing up, I'm erect, and I have no idea how I'm doing that. And I know I'm not doing it very well because I can't move like this person. I can't move like this person. I can't move like this person. So that became the focus for me as a habit to be taken apart. Whew. Wow. These talks take on a life of them, a life of their own. Another time check, because I want to respect that, 8:20. How about if I stop and ask what's on your mind? Having stuck with me this long, we got 10 more minutes, and I'd be happy to hear questions or reactions for yourself. I've given you I've given you something of me. What do you got? What's on your mind? And as I will always say, you are welcome to send me a note if you want to carry on this conversation. We can do it by email, we can do it by Zoom, we can do it with a phone call. If there's something that grab a hold and you want to pick up. There are three things I wanted to end with. One is, please do what you can for the people of Ukraine. Please do what you can so that democracy is preserved. Please do what you can to face the growing climate crisis. Whatever your training is about, whatever your life is about, I would ask that of you.